This story is called The Last Rose of Summer. My name is Chadwick Billings. I shall be 102 years old next week. That seems a more apposite way of saying it than I will celebrate my 102nd birthday next week, because there's not much to celebrate when there's no one left to celebrate with. It's not a family trait that I've lived so long. Neither of my parents reached the biblical 70. I live in a beautiful country home, looking out over the Niagara Escarpment to Lake Ontario in the distance. I bought the property and built the house over 50 years ago, when Billings Steel had grown to be one of the most successful suppliers of structural steel in southwestern Ontario. It's been home to me and my family ever since. That is, to my wife Adele, my children Brian and Cheryl. Of that small family, I'm the only one left. All this reminds me of the poem The Last Rose of Summer, written on an early 19th century winter day by an Irish poet named Thomas Moore. Legend has it that the poem was inspired by a late blooming rose in the gardens of Jenkinson's Town Park in County Kilkenny, where the author was staying. As a teenager, my great-grandfather worked as an undergardener on that very same estate, and I've often wondered whether he might have encountered, or perhaps even might have spoken to, the author of the poem as he was pruning the roses. My great-grandfather emigrated to Canada in the mid-19th century. Alfred Billings was an Irish Protestant, though his ancestors were presumably English. That's because the family name Billings originally was someone from the village of Billing near Liverpool. I feel a strong connection to the poem and to the tune to which it is set. 'Tis the last rose of summer, left blooming alone. All her lovely companions are faded and gone. No flood of her kindred, no rosebud is nigh to reflect back her blushes and give sigh for sigh. I know how she feels, that last rose of summer, for her situation parallels my own. Now, I've had a wonderful life. I've had success in business, and I've had dearly beloved family members. But I'm left blooming all alone. Though, when I look in the mirror each morning at the wispy remnants of my hair and my brown speckled countenance, I wonder whether to describe myself as still blooming or as fading gradually away. Either way, there's no question that my lovely companions are now all faded and gone. I sigh often, but in contrast with Thomas More's words, there is no one left to reflect my sighs back to me. Adele, the loveliest of my lovely companions, passed away in her 80s, almost 20 years ago. A beautiful woman, slim and dark-haired, we met when I was struggling to bring Billings Steel to profitability. We got to know each other, somewhat improbably for those days, for she was a young associate in the law practice that what we always call BS dealt with. There were very few female lawyers back then. I don't know whether I should call it love at first sight or not, but I was immediately attracted to this stylish and confident woman. We married just under a year after we first met, and that love of my life surprised me by continuing to practice law after our marriage, in a day when most women gave up any pretensions to a career once they gained their so-called MRS. Not only that, but she managed to continue professionally, even after Brian and Cheryl were born. Although, of course, we were fortunate, to be able to afford full-time in-home child care. To me, there was never any other flower of her kindred. No other rosebud ever came nigh. We remained faithful to each other and in love all our mutual days. Adele was a stylish ballroom dancer. We danced throughout our married life. I well recall the admiring glances that she evoked as we danced Viennese waltzes when we took a transatlantic cruise to Europe. That was over 30 years ago. Adele was almost 70 by then, yet for me there was still no flower of her kindred. The occasion was a post-retirement vacation. It was long after luxury liners had given way to jet aircraft as the normal means of transatlantic travel. Even my 2 children have predeceased me. Brian took over the business, but he never had any passion for it. He died of a heart attack over 10 years ago. It was probably stress. I should have seen it coming and sold the business earlier when I saw how running the company taxed him so much. Not that Brian was one of those useless as tits on a bull types who drove the family business into the ground. Far from it. Brian expanded BS into the US market far more successfully than I could ever have done. But the effort took its toll on him. I should have been more observant, I suppose, but I was living in North Burlington and he in Hamilton, and we saw each other mostly at the twice-monthly executive group meetings. I had retained the position of emeritus CEO at Brian's insistence. My lovely Cheryl, a rosebud who is truly her mother's daughter, has been passed away for so long I can hardly remember her. She succumbed to breast cancer in her early 40s. It broke Adele's heart. Heavens, that's nearly 40 years ago. All I have is pictures by which to recollect her appearance. Not a motion picture of her as she was, rather a sequence of stills from the movie. So what companions do I have these days? Only the paid staff who tend to my various needs. Yes, I know that I'm fortunate materially. I could be so much worse off. Most elderly folks don't have my financial resources, and many live in penury. Many also have lost their physical or mental abilities and live in long-term care facilities. However, for me, there's Eric, my long-term manservant, as well as my wonderful Filipina cook, Rosita, who manages to tempt my palate somewhat, despite the ravages of time that have atrophied the majority of my taste buds. How do my taste buds stack up against the rosebuds in Thomas More's poem, I wonder? Of course, there are also the ladies of the cleaning service who come in each week. My lawyer, Parker Knowles, and my financial advisor, Martin Trainer, who makes an appointment with me on the first Thursday morning of each month to keep me appraised of my investment portfolio. This is to ensure that my investments grow. In reality, I've long since reached the point at which it would be impossible for me to outspend my financial capital, or even the income for that matter. I'll not leave thee, thou lone one, to pine on the stem, since the lovely are sleeping. Go sleep thou with them. Thus kindly I scatter thy leaves o'er the bed, where thy mates of the garden lie scentless and dead. Ah, my mates of the garden, they're all sleeping, Adele, Cheryl, Brian, all scentless and dead. You all left me the lone one to pine on the stem, and not the other way round. I've always said that if you want to have a big funeral, you'd better die young. Even today I can remember the large number of mourners at Cheryl's funeral, even though their faces have disappeared. She was just 42. all her friends from the Toronto Star newsroom, other journalists, her tennis buddies. She was so very vivacious and so very much missed. There must have been nearly 150 in the church, quite apart from all those at the visitation the evening before. I remember it particularly because the funeral director had told us that our local church, St George's up on the hill, would be too small. So the funeral was held at one of the larger churches in Burlington. Truth to tell, I wasn't all that sorry about the change of location, though it bothered Adele. The minister who was at St George's back then was far too conservative for my taste theologically. I've never been able to accept substitutionary atonement, the idea that Christ died for my personal sins. If it's really true that all my debts have already been paid in full, then why bother to lead a decent life? Just eat, drink and be merry, I would say. Brian's funeral was a large affair too. He was still the CEO of Billings Steel when the heart attack took him, so there was a huge turnout of employees, customers and others in the business, as well as friends. Eleanor, that's Ellie, suggested would it be best to hold the funeral down in Hamilton where Brian was better known. Adele was dead by that time, and truth to tell, I felt rather out of it. Brian's colleagues and employees were of a different generation than I, and so I only knew a few of the old-timers. Brian and Ellie never had children, so there are no grandchildren coming after me. That's why I have such a strong sense of being the last rose of summer. No more roses of my kindred, not next summer, not ever. I sometimes think of all the Billingses down the ages, all those ancestors who combined their genes to make me, those in Ontario, those in Ireland, those in Billing near Liverpool. I'm the end of the line. Change the metaphor, like the words of the song, Last Train from San Fernando. If you miss this one, there'll never be another one. The difference is that no one's going to miss this one. Adele herself got a pretty good send-off because of her charitable work. We were very well known locally as a couple. I know the local newspapers always identified Mr. and Mrs. Billings as well-known philanthropists, but in truth I was never all that comfortable in attending the gala fundraisers and such like. Adele was so much more outgoing and vivacious than I ever was. It made us a great couple though. I had made enough money with the firm to be able to support all her charitable endeavours. Many of those she'd become acquainted with through her legal practice, and typically of Adele, she'd taken on most of them as pro bono clients. She didn't need extra income, and so she was able to select organisations in whose work she believed. We always attended these wingdings together, though I was something of a silent partner in that enterprise. I was much more comfortable giving a speech to the local Chamber of Commerce than to the supporters of the Women's Shelter or the local Arts Council. So soon may I follow when friendships decay, and from love's shining circle the gems drop away. When true hearts lie withered and fond ones are flown, oh, who would inhabit this bleak world alone? What about me and my funeral? I can't expect much of a crowd. Everyone I knew as a friend or a colleague is long since dead. I have neither true hearts nor fond ones to mourn my passing when it comes. They've all passed on ahead of me. Maybe I shall meet them again on the other side, but in truth, my confidence even in that has nearly evaporated. I've asked for my funeral to be held at St George's, and I'll be buried in the cemetery there with Adele. At least in death I'll be able to join my lovely companion again and recreate my love's shining circle. The cemetery is a lovely location, looking out over on the side of the escarpment, and on a clear day you can see right out to the CN Tower in Toronto. The church itself has an atmosphere of stillness and a sense of the presence of the divine, though I doubt that mourners will fill very many of the 100 or so seats. I discussed my wishes for the service with the local minister. He seems to be amenable to providing me with a send-off that is befitting to a man who's lived a life full of years and whose spirituality recognises the divine but is short on dogma. The firm will send a small delegation, I'm sure, in memory of the founder, even though the company has long since passed out of my ownership. There may be a couple of neighbours, but besides Eric, Rosita, Parker Knowles and Martin Traynor, I can't imagine that anyone else will know or care that I've departed this life. I have little desire to continue to inhabit this world, for it truly becomes a bleak existence to live in this world alone. My name is Chadwick Billings, and I shall be 102 years old next week. I suppose I shall probably make it to next week to complete that 102nd year. Perhaps in the future people will glance at my tombstone and ponder on the long life that I have lived. They will probably think of me as lucky to have lived so long. In a sense that will be true. Success in business, plenty of money, loving and well-loved wife and children. I have been uncommonly well blessed. But they will not likely discern the world has seemed a bleak one in these last years because I have lived in it alone. The gems have dropped away, the lovely are sleeping, and it's time for me to follow and go and sleep with them.